Throughout most of human history, cities have followed a simple and almost universal rule: they grow outward. When populations increased, when trade expanded, when wealth and power concentrated in one place, cities did not rise toward the sky. Instead, they spread across the land. New streets appeared, new neighborhoods were built. And the city expanded like ripples moving outward across water. For thousands of years, from ancient Rome to medieval Paris, from the great trading cities of Asia to the Islamic urban centers of the Middle East, this pattern remained largely unchanged. Human civilization built horizontally. Buildings could be magnificent, monumental, and complex, but rarely did they rise more than a few stories high. It was not because people lacked ambition, it was because the materials and engineering methods available to them kept pulling their creations back toward the earth. But in the late 19th century, on a small island along the eastern coast of the United States, that ancient rule began to break. That island was Manhattan. At the time, Manhattan was rapidly becoming the center of a new world. Banks, insurance companies, shipping firms, and trading houses all wanted to establish their headquarters there. Wall Street was emerging as the financial heart of the United States, and with economic expansion came an enormous demand for office space.
But Manhattan faced a serious problem. It was an island. To the west lay the Hudson River, to the east flowed the East River, and to the south stretched the vast Atlantic Ocean. Land could not expand indefinitely. Every square meter of property in Manhattan was becoming more valuable by the day. Real estate prices rose rapidly, and many businesses began to realize that land costs were becoming one of their greatest financial burdens. Throughout history, when cities became crowded, the solution had always been to expand outward into the surrounding countryside. But Manhattan could not easily do that. Its geography had locked it in place. And within that constraint, a bold idea slowly began to emerge. If the city could not expand outward, then perhaps it could grow upward.
At first glance, the idea seemed simple. But in reality, it represented a direct challenge to centuries of architectural tradition. For generations, buildings had been constructed from brick and stone, their entire structure depended on load-bearing walls. These walls carried the full weight of everything above them. The taller the building, the thicker the walls had to be. In many late 19th century buildings, the walls at the ground floor could be nearly 2 meters thick. If architects attempted to build even higher, the walls would have to grow even thicker. Eventually, the base of the building would become so massive that it would consume most of the usable interior space. This was the fundamental limitation of traditional architecture: gravity always won. But the 19th century was also the age of the Industrial Revolution. Steel production was rapidly advancing. Factories were learning how to produce stronger and more reliable steel in unprecedented quantities. Steel was a remarkable material. It was stronger than stone, it was lighter than stone, and most importantly, it could form incredibly strong structural frameworks. Some engineers began to imagine a completely different way of building. Instead of relying on thick walls to carry the weight of a building, what if a metal framework could do the job instead? This idea led to one of the most important innovations in architectural history: the steel skeleton. In this design, the building functioned almost like a living body. Steel columns served as the backbone, steel beams acted like ribs. The entire weight of the building was transferred through the steel frame and down into the foundation below. The outer walls no longer needed to support the structure. They became merely a protective shell surrounding the frame.
This change transformed architecture. Walls could now be thinner, windows could be larger, and most importantly, buildings could rise far higher than ever before. But even after engineers solved the structural problem, another major obstacle remained: people. Imagine working in a 20-story building in the year 1880. Every morning you would need to climb hundreds of stairs just to reach your office. In reality, most people at that time were willing to climb only 4 or 5 floors at most. The higher floors of buildings were often considered less desirable and were usually cheaper to rent. This meant that even if engineers could build a very tall structure, it might still fail economically if people could not easily reach the upper floors. The solution arrived through another invention, one that seemed simple yet proved revolutionary: the elevator. In 1853, an engineer named Elisha Otis staged a dramatic demonstration at an industrial exhibition in New York. He stood on a platform suspended high above the ground by a rope. A large crowd gathered below to watch. Then Otis gave a signal. His assistant cut the rope. The audience gasped. If the cable failed, the platform would fall and Otis would likely die instantly. But when the rope snapped, the platform dropped only a few centimeters before stopping suddenly. Otis had invented a safety brake system for elevators. If the cable broke, metal clamps would automatically lock the elevator car onto guide rails, preventing it from falling. That moment changed the future of architecture. For the first time in history, humans could move vertically in a safe and reliable way. When steel frame construction was combined with the elevator, an entirely new possibility emerged. Cities could grow upward. In 1885, the world witnessed the construction of a remarkable building. In Chicago, the home insurance building rose above the city. It was only about 10 stories tall by modern standards. But what made it revolutionary was its steel structural frame. Many historians consider it the first true skyscraper in the world. From that moment forward, a race began. Architects and engineers quickly realized that the sky was no longer the limit. If one building could rise 10 stories, why not 20? If 20 stories were possible, why not 30? New York soon became the center of this vertical revolution. Over the following decades, the skyline of Manhattan began to change dramatically. New towers appeared, each one taller than the last. 20 stories, 30 stories, 40 stories. Companies began competing not only through wealth or influence, but through the height of the buildings they constructed. Structures such as the Flatiron Building, the Woolworth Building, and later the Chrysler Building became symbols of a new age. But behind the elegance of these towering structures stood the dangerous work of thousands of steel workers. These men labored hundreds of feet above the ground, balancing on narrow steel beams. In many cases, they had no safety harnesses. Strong winds swept through the skeletal frameworks of unfinished towers. A single misstep could mean death. Jet photographs from the era show workers casually sitting on steel beams high above Manhattan, eating lunch, smoking cigarettes, and chatting as if they were sitting in a cafe. Below them stretched an empty drop of hundreds of feet. These workers were the true builders of the vertical city. The skyscraper was not merely a technical achievement. It was also a psychological revolution. For thousands of years, cities had been imagined as horizontal spaces. Streets spread outward from central plazas. Neighborhoods expanded across the landscape. But skyscrapers forced people to think differently. A city could now exist in layers. Offices on the 30th floor, restaurants on the 50th, observation decks on the 80th. Urban life began stacking itself vertically. From New York, this idea spread across the world. Tokyo built vertical commercial districts. Hong Kong transformed towering apartment blocks into homes for millions. Dubai constructed buildings so tall they seemed to challenge the sky itself. Modern megacities everywhere carry the legacy of the revolution that began in Manhattan. Today, when we look at the skyline of New York, we see forests of glass and steel reflecting sunlight across the Hudson River. But each of those towers represents more than architecture. They represent over a century of innovation, ambition, risk, and human determination. The skyscraper did more than change how buildings were constructed. It changed how humanity imagined space. Instead of being confined to the ground, we began to see the sky as a new frontier. And it all began with a simple question asked by engineers and entrepreneurs on a crowded island at the end of the 19th century. If the city could no longer expand outward, why not let it rise into the sky?